The cabin had always been my place of retreat, a quiet wooden structure tucked into the fold of towering pines where the air was fresher, the silence thicker, and the world seemed to move at its proper pace again. After months of tense meetings and endless city noise, I finally carved out a weekend to escape there, carrying with me little more than a duffel bag, a small stack of books, the satisfaction of knowing no one could disturb me. The morning was still young when I stepped outside, the fog still clinging low to the forest floor like a thin blanket refusing to lift. And I busied myself with the simple, grounding task of stacking firewood along the porch rail. I was in the middle of splitting a log when I caught sight of movement at the edge of the clearing, a flicker of color among the green and brown. A boy, hardly more than 12 or 13, stood frozen at the tree line, his eyes wide, his shoulders stiff. With the nervous tension of someone who felt he had stumbled into the wrong place, I raised my hand in a casual greeting, intending only to reassure him. But before I could speak a word, he spun on his heel and vanished into the trees, as though the very sight of me had set off alarms. I chuckled softly to myself at first, thinking, perhaps he was just shy or out exploring without permission, but within 10 minutes the tranquility of the forest was broken by a sound I hadn't expected, the unmistakable cadence of a woman's voice rising sharply, cutting through the trees. She was calling for her son, though the tone suggested she was less concerned for his safety and more outraged at what he had reported. Then, like a storm cloud sweeping into the clearing, she appeared on the gravel path, marching with righteous fury, her phone already pressed against her ear. I could hear fragments of her conversation as she approached, words like trespasser, dangerous. An immediate response carried easily on the still morning air. I stood there with my hands relaxed at my sides, watching her approach, debating whether to interject or simply let her finish whatever narrative she was spinning to the dispatcher on the other end. Her son trailed behind her at a distance, his small face pale with uncertainty, though he said nothing. The woman stopped at the edge of the porch and leveled a finger at me as though she were accusing a criminal. Her words were sharp, brittle, and filled with that particular kind of authority some people wield when they believe their voice alone can shape reality. Yes, that's him, officer. Some strange man hanging around the cabin. My son saw him, and I don't know what he's doing here, but I want someone out here immediately. She ended the call with a satisfied huff, folding her arms tightly across her chest as if to say, the matter was already settled. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath with me. I didn't reply right away, though I could have told her the cabin had belonged to me for over a decade, or that the land deed was in my name, or even that I had spent countless nights here long before she had ever discovered this trail. Instead, I leaned back against the porch railing, watching as a hint of nervous energy flickered in the boy's eyes. And I thought about how easily misunderstandings could spiral when fueled by fear and assumption. The silence didn't last. Long, a faint but rising wail carried on the wind, the sirens of a police cruiser winding its way up the dirt road toward us. The woman's face lit with vindication, convinced she had acted in her right, while I stood quietly, my mind shifting. Not to panic, but to curiosity. It wasn't the first time someone had called the law on me under strange circumstances. But something in the pit of my stomach told me this encounter would unfold in a way none of us could have predicted. The sound of the sirens grew closer until they were no longer an echo in the distance, but a sharp wail at the edge of the clearing. And then a black and white cruiser emerged between the trees, its tires crunching on the gravel road that cut across the property. The woman Karen, as I would later learn her name, to be straightened her posture, her face shining with a mixture of triumph and relief, as though the arrival of law enforcement was proof enough of her judgment and an immediate condemnation. Of mine, she marched forward to meet the vehicle, her finger darting back toward me the moment the officer stepped out. That's him, she announced before the man had even closed his door. That's the stranger my son saw sneaking around. This cabin? Told you someone dangerous was out here? Her voice carried that ironclad certainty that demanded agreement. I noticed the boy shrinking slightly behind her, his eyes locked on me, torn between his mother's narrative and some unspoken instinct that maybe things weren't as she had claimed. The officer, tall and broad-shouldered with the steady composure of a man accustomed to confrontations, walked toward me with his hand resting casually but deliberately near his holster. His expression was unreadable, a careful mask, as his gaze flicked from Karen to me and back again. For a moment, the tension was thick enough to slice. Then, in a single breath, the mask broke. His eyes widened with recognition, and before I could even open my mouth to explain, he snapped his heels together and raised his hand in a crisp, flawless salute. "Yes, Major General." His voice was firm, respectful, and resonant, the kind of acknowledgement that rang with practiced discipline and genuine admiration. The forest seemed to freeze in that instant. Karen's mouth fell open, her indignation caught mid-sentence, her confident stance collapsing as she struggled to process what she had just witnessed. The boy peeked out from behind her, his eyes wide not with fear, but with a kind of awe reserved for heroes in the flesh. The officer held his salute for a moment longer before lowering his hand. His entire demeanor transformed from cautious suspicion to deferential respect. "It's an honor, sir," he said with a nod, his tone carrying both pride and a subtle reprimand to those who had doubted my right to stand here. Karen sputtered, words tumbling from her lips without form. "Major General? What? No, that can't." He was just standing there. My son saw him. Her accusations, once sharp and commanding, now sounded fragile, hollow, almost desperate. The officer turned toward her, his voice calm but edged with authority. "Ma'am, you may not realize this, but the man standing here has more right to be on this property than you ever could. He's a decorated veteran, a man who's served this country at the highest level. You should consider yourself fortunate he even entertained your accusations with patience." His words cut through her bluster like a blade through thin paper, leaving her silent, her face flushing crimson as she wrestled with the weight of her mistake. I remained quiet, watching as the boy's gaze lingered on me with something close to admiration, a spark of curiosity replacing the earlier fear. The officer stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Didn't think I'd ever meet you out here, sir. I read about your command, an honor I won't forget." I gave him a small nod, grateful for his professionalism, but unwilling to bask in the moment. My life had been built on service, not spectacle, and the cabin was meant for peace, not recognition. Still, as Karen pulled her son away, muttering, under her breath, her arrogance punctured, and her confidence drained, I felt the stillness of the forest return. The firewood lay stacked neatly. The fog had finally lifted, and in the quiet aftermath, there was a clarity that no misunderstanding could cloud. The truth had a way of cutting through noise, and in that clearing, with the officer's salute still fresh in memory, it was undeniable.